Hey everybody, welcome back to We Are Podcast.
This is I Hate Being Sober, Season 1, Episode 13, Living with Tourettes with Azreer Gill.
If this is your first time checking out the podcast network, please head over to your favorite podcast app, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, or iTunes, and give We Are Podcast Network a like. And if you get a chance, head over to our social media. All links can be found in the description. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at /We Are Podcast. And with that said, on to the podcast.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to
I Hate Being Sober!
And now our host, Doug!
Hey everybody, welcome to I Hate Being Sober, where we talk personal stories from epic people. Today, I have a super epic person who I met through a comedy class, and he has a great story he's going to share with us. It's Azreer Gill. Is it Azreer or Azreer? I want to get that right.
Yeah, it's Azreer, but I do have friends that call me Azreer as well. So
okay, so it could be either. Azreer, thank you so much for being here. This is going to be super awesome. Today, we're going to talk about your Tourette's, something that you've struggled with, I'm guessing, your entire life, or something that you've dealt with. Is struggle the right word for it? I mean, is it a struggle? Is it something, or do you have it under control is the question?
That's a really good question, Ducky. Growing up, it started off as a struggle. As life moves on, for me, it turned into more of something I learned to use and work with. So it was a struggle that kind of worked in my benefit later on in life.
Right on, dude. That's so awesome. So I'm happy to know that there's a happy ending to this story. And let's talk about where you're from and where you live. You live in Canada, but where are you from originally?
Yeah, for sure. So I was actually born and raised in northern Canada, close to Alaska, about a couple hundred miles south of Alaska, a town called Tourettes, BC. But my ethnicity is Indian, meaning my mom and dad, they are from India, the northwestern part of India, an area called Punjab, where they speak Punjabi. And they came over to Canada in 79. So even though like my roots are based out of India, I grew up in the Canadian system. And so that's kind of where I'm from. But at the end of the day, I'm still Indian by heart, for sure.
That's awesome, dude. That's so cool. But yeah, also Canadian. So that's very cool too. So you get the best of both worlds, I take it. What was that like growing up in Canada? In the United States, we deal with a lot of racism. And being Indian, did you feel that in Canada, or are most people cool and chill and they don't throw that flack at you?
It really depends where one lives in the province. We call them your state equivalent. And so in the province of British Columbia on the west side, it really depends. There's urban areas where it's not as prevalent. And then there's remote communities that it's more common. Although at the same time, in the community I grew up in, it's a good 14-hour drive away from one of the major cities in Canada. So that was it. There was like 10 to 12 Indo-Canadian families, and my mom and dad being one. And the kids, they just kind of grew up like they were everyone else. And when I say everyone else, it was like the X's. We were the X's trying to fit in with the Y's, and the Y's being the 95% white folks. And so growing up, because I've never left that remote community up until grade 11, I just thought that the rest of the world operated like my hometown. And it becomes kind of a norm until you leave that town and then you come back, whether it's a vacation or a long period of time, you're like, whoa, the rest of the world doesn't operate this way. And back to your question about kind of racism in that town, people learn to kind of grow to love you. It's weird how it works. I went through high school there all the way up to grade 12, and people knew me, they knew my name. So I didn't feel it, I didn't see it in front of me. I leave that town, it was a different story. I would go to a different town. It's almost like starting from scratch because I didn't really fit in visually right off the get-go. It's interesting though. It's really interesting. And I think that up there, people have lived the Ys, which I call the 95%. The white people have lived there their entire lives, and even up to today, they have never left. So how do you comment on something that you haven't been exposed to, which is that cultural life in the city? I find the more we travel and the more we check out this globe, our view of life becomes so broad, and we realize that, hey, we're all the same people. We're all striving for the same things. So,
right.
Yeah.
Did you ever get bullied or anything like that?
There was one or two individuals at school, but it wasn't constant. It was more so around Yeah, it was kind of around Tourette's, twitching, but I learned that if I learned to work with whatever's coming my way, the heckle, let's say, or someone's punching down on me, if I learn to work with that, my time's going to be great. If I attack it, it's going to be a snowball effect that might result in other people trying to tackle me as well. Physical bullying, very rare. It was like maybe fights that surfaced through frustration, but maybe once or twice throughout high school. Verbal bullying, yeah, at times throughout the years, there was some of that, but I think kids are just being kids. It kind of went both ways. Yeah.
And what I was curious because in my experience, a lot of my comedy comes from being bullied, which is a blessing and a curse because I have PTSD because of the bullies. So I still dream about them every night. It's wonderful. But I also learned if I made people laugh or if I made people like me, I could keep from them hurting me. And so that's why I was curious if your experience was the same as mine. Where did the comedy come from? Did it come from that, from becoming personal and dealing with it that way, or did it come from somewhere else?
Really good question, Ducky. The comedy, I started writing about 2.5 years ago, but I always wanted to get on stage and say what was on my mind. I had a tough time growing up communicating to people. A lot of it was my speech impediment. Growing up, I wasn't even, I couldn't connect my brain to my mouth, my verbal words. And it was just like, growing up was just, how do I put this? I can't even tell you what my first language was. It was like broken up Punjabi in the house and then English everywhere outside the house. My parents' Punjabi wasn't even super strong. It was from a remote area in India, and you take that to a remote area in Canada, whatever's being taught to me, you look outside the house, I can't even converse with anyone outside the house in my Punjabi. So there was no one to correct me with that. You throw in Tourette syndrome on top of the speech impediment. And just when I remember watching Russell Peters for the very first time on TV, and the Canadian broadcasting, they allowed Russell to be broadcasted on a nationwide scale, and that's rare. And I think they did it because the things he was talking about, it was things that were on the white people's mind, the brown person's mind, pretty much every culture out there. And I was watching him on TV. I'm like, wow, you can say that? You can open your mind and say those things. And people are laughing at it because it's relatable. And he's strategically delivering what he's saying to the audience. And I'm like, I want to do that. Like, I always wanted to do that. And I never knew where to start, Ducky. And yeah, so that took me from high school up until like, early 20s, like even through college, where I wasn't able to get my words out. I needed something. I really needed something in my system, help me to talk.
You said you had both the speech impediment and the Tourette's. So the speech impediment, what was that? Just stumbling over words, you said?
Stumbling over words, not being able to complete my sentences, just stopping right in between a sentence or after a couple words, searching for the word so I can say it. That was a big part of it, and maybe just not knowing and comprehending what I was reading at the time too.
Dyslexia then too, or is that something different?
Probably non-diagnosed dyslexia. That sounds about right. Mm-hmm. Where the words are just kind of jumping out on the page at me, and
That's a struggle, I'll tell you what. And then the Tourette's on top of it. What form does the Tourette's take for you? Is it just tics, or is it words, or is it a little bit of everything?
Pretty much a combination of everything, Ducky. I will twitch to the left a lot. You know, I will say words. If I see something that I want to say, like a tree, I'm looking at a green or red leaves on a tree, or if I see a different race in the lineup, I want to say it out loud. Mm-hmm. And it's never just one. Like I'll say, for example, it's a giant. It's a giant. And if people turn around and look, because I'm trying to make reference to a person that might look large, and I'll say it's a giant, it's a giant. And if people keep looking, I will have to keep trying to say it until I'm convinced they've no longer noticed. And so that would happen a lot. And it didn't help when I had 3 sisters in the house and a mom that would always like be like, okay, stop doing that. As soon as you say stop doing that to someone that has Tourette's, I will keep doing it. So non-verbal forms of Tourette's were common. They were seasonal as well. They would come and go. Hotter climates, there were different terms. Cooler climates, I was more calm and relaxed, and so you wouldn't see it as much. Sports agitated it. The twitching was common. The elbow kind of like this, where I kind of go like this, that was pretty common. diving the elbow into like whatever back platform is behind me. That was pretty common. And the eyes, I had the eye thing for a long time, but it was seasonal. Sometimes, some years it would show up, other years it would be completely absent.
It's seasonal. That's interesting. Because I have arthritis and that's seasonal. You know, I get in pain at a certain time. But you're saying based upon the season of the year, your Tourette's would change to something for like a period of 3 months and then change again. Is that correct?
Yeah. And a lot of it, I think with season, I need to add external kind of influences like temperature when it's hot, crowded conditions and hot. Too many people, overwhelming for me. I'm from a small town. When I see lots of people, I'm like, no, that's just going to agitate the Tourette's. And these were all triggers. In the winter, colder months, lots of space. I'm in the room by myself. It was the opposite. Or I'm outside building a snowman. I don't know what people do, but things like that, I would be more calm and relaxed.
So anxiety goes hand in hand with your Tourette's. Is that correct?
I think so, Ducky. I think anxiety just kind of got lost in translation for me because there was all this other stuff going on. Mm-hmm. I think anxiety is a part of it. Depression was a part of it as well. There was the key things were kind of like, I can't speak and this person doesn't look appealing. Sometimes I'm just sitting there twitching. Mm-hmm. I think with that anxiety came and depression was present as well.
So do you take medication for it? Is there such thing as medication for it or just coping mechanisms? It seems like a lot of the things you're saying like aren't visible right now speaking to you. You know, I don't see any of the tics or anything like that. But at the same time, do you take medication for it? Is that possible? Or how do you cope with it?
So growing up, I did see a pediatrician. We never had a neurologist in the town that I grew up in. And the pediatricians, first of all, my mom, there was a language barrier because my mom's English wasn't that strong. And it was just hilarious trying to communicate what was going on. But what do you do, right? It's the best kind of, at least we have some sort of medical or professional advice. And the idea is like, I identified some of the triggers, things like temperature, playing sports, being agitated, hot climates. If we can suppress the hyperactivity in me, maybe I won't twitch as much. So there was, they tried a few drowsy medications, some depressants, and I wouldn't wake up. So then they gave me a pill called clonidine, the physician there. Again, with clonidine, it's supposed to suppress my hyperactivity. If I'm not as agitated, maybe I won't twitch. And I was on that for a long time, several years. And yeah, looking back at it now, I can't change any of that. I would have just went non-medicated because there is no cure. The only kind of cure is I work on myself, identify my triggers, and then learn to kind of control it in society. And so it's a formula of knowing what I have and time. And when I know what I have and know how to control it in time, that'll give me scenarios in different environments that I know what works for me, know what doesn't. So the answer to me is someone with Tourette's learns to control it as the person ages.
Do we know what Tourette's comes from? Is it genetic or is it just, like you said, a neurological condition that happens randomly?
Really good question. I don't know details. There is links though that it is genetic. For the longest time, I couldn't see the genetic side because I wasn't really connected with my cousins and my aunts and uncles. And then when my parents moved down to Vancouver, it turns out my cousin does the same stuff. He has Tourette's. He was diagnosed with it. And this was before he knew that I kind of had Tourette's as well. And then my cousin in Toronto as well. So I can see it on my dad's side. I totally see it on my dad's side. And I don't know the reasoning behind it, but it is to do with brain functions. And it's something that's going on up here that's allowing me to move my uncontrollable gestures and uncontrollable voluntary vocal sounds. I do have one other thing though. It's kind of a fluid sac sitting on my cerebellum. Mm-hmm. And the cerebellum controls the motor functions of the body. And so sometimes I do wonder, well, is it more so Tourette's or is it because I have pressure on my cerebellum? It's just a fluid sac. Right. And it's been there since I was a kid. So I always have those questions, and that's something for me to really maybe reach out to a neurologist sometime in the future and just see if there's been any updates on research to see what's going on.
I mean, is it something that you can have removed, the fluid sac, or no?
When I was younger, physicians wanted that fluid sac drained. My parents didn't know enough about it, so they left it. Now that I'm fully developed, they're like, no, you know what? Let's just leave it, because if it bursts, it's not going to do anything. I'm like, okay. Yeah, so now that I'm fully developed, they just kind of leave it.
Well, I wanted to ask you about the depression. You said the depression, was it based upon the Tourette's, or was it based upon just you had depression just like most of us do? You know what I mean? I know you struggled with it. Was it a big struggle, or was it depression just depression?
Ducky, it's our worlds, what we see externally bring in that feeling, or just not wanting to, like, we all seek, I guess, love and compassion growing up. And when it's not there or it's absent, we get into these states. And one of the things I got to was depression, because I was different in so many different ways. And yeah.
Well, see, I was the same way. When I grew up, I had something called leg Perthes disease, which is a deterioration of the femur bone. And so instead of having a perfect femur, I had a flattened one, and it would fall out. And so my hip was messed up. So I was in a wheelchair a lot of my childhood. And people treat you differently. And people are mean. Kids are mean, specifically. And so I had leg braces. Think, you ever seen Forrest Gump before the movie, how he had leg braces? I had something like that. So they kept my legs separated. I waddled around, and you'd think my name Duck came from that. It's not. But I look like a penguin more than a duck, right? But kids, like I said, and even adults sometimes, they ignore you, or they bully you, or they say things, and it hurts, and it stays with you. And like I said, my coping mechanism was to make them laugh. If I can make people laugh or like me, immediately it would make things so much easier. And so it's hard being different, dude. It really is. It's hard standing out. But also what comes from that, I think that for me, I want to be a comedian. You want to be a comedian. I think that urge to want to entertain, to want to be different on a stage, and to bring a story to people, I think that partially that comes from that experience. Because like I said, I learned if I can make people laugh, they wouldn't hurt me. But now I want to make people laugh because I enjoy it. And that's why I wanted to really talk to you about. You have a story to tell. You know, you use Tourette's in your comedy. It's not just that, but it's part of it. Where did that idea come from? Is it from Russell Brand and seeing, you know, he's very existential and he's very in touch with his inner self and things like that. Is that kind of what you want to do? What do you foresee in yourself doing the comedy in the future? And have you done comedy already?
For sure, Ducky. I've done a couple shows in the Arctic. It's a different setting where we don't have open mics. We'll get a show once or twice a year, and they look for locals to kind of open for them. And I should backtrack. I have been living in the Arctic for the last 3 years just for a job. And yeah, like I find here's where I'm at with comedy. When I highlight, I'm not there to kind of get multiple laughs a minute. To me, it's a message. And how do I tell a message that's told in a way that the audience is going to stay engaged? And to me, it's like one person in the audience. It's therapeutic when I highlight my bullshit, like my Tourette's, my depression, my anxiety, me being a fish out of the water, and me still being alive today. And when I highlight all that, it's not about the materialistic things in the world. It's about accepting ourselves and moving forward strong. It's just one connection in the audience, and someone to say that, hey, I needed to hear 10 seconds of what Azreer had to say today. That's more than enough. You know, it's that one person that I'm after. And on a comedy stage, since for the longest time I wasn't able to communicate to people, when I'm on a stage, it's one-way communication and one way only. I don't really want the audience to talk back. I mean, if you do, go for it. I'll just do what I did as when I was a kid being heckled. I just worked with it. Right. That's the best I can do. That's the most authentic thing for me to do, is just to work with you. I don't have a rebuttal for you. I don't have anything. I'm just going to work with you and go on with my whatever I have to say. So on a stage, it's almost like the audience just sits there, smiles, or just be quiet. You take your pick. But it is therapeutic. Like I feel like I have so much of my experiences to share with the world, and people may be able to relate, because like we're all people living in different parts of the world, and there's a lot of these common scenarios that lead to depression, anxiety, and kids not trying to fit in, and what people do in society to fit in. At the end of the day, we all come into this world alone and we leave alone. And so why not help people lead their life through a healthy way? And yeah.
It's interesting you chose comedy too, because dealing with the Tourette's, you know what I mean? It's such a personal thing, but it seems like you have no fear of people knowing about it or seeing it on stage. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I've been publicized my entire life wherever I go, and so people see it, and I think like life almost ended a few times for me. And so when that happens to an individual, not that what I'm about to say, I'm giving myself permission to do this on stage. It's this mentality that formulates is like, why do I have to hide what I have to say? Because if I can change someone else from getting to where I got to, which is kind of like rock bottom. So I truly believe is when we share our vulnerabilities, that's when it sparks like a light in other people's vulnerability in their head, which is usually in a dark spot. And then when we encourage people to share in groups, you never know what common ground is going to be found.
Yeah, your positivity is infectious. That's all I'm going to say. I freaking love it, man. And like people, they'll see a picture of you. It is going to be up on the thing. But like, dude, handsome dude, got a great smile, pure charisma coming out of you. And you can see the light, man. And it's wonderful. And where does that positivity come from? Is that something that you just learned to look at that side of life, or do you have somebody in your life that kind of showed you that?
It's such a big question. It's a combination of my upbringing, what I went through, going to literally pretty much drinking every day. I needed to drink to cope with what I was going through, even to speak to people one-on-one in groups. And I used to modify my identity to fit in. I had to. And the only way to modify who I truly was, this is me right here, but to modify what I'm doing and to fit into different social circles, I had to drink. There's no way around it. And to communicate and to be likable. So now when I took that route and that almost killed me several times, I came out of that. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, well, I was 28 years old when I stopped drinking. I'm 33 years old now. And I realized that I don't need any of that in my life. I mean, life can end on a dime. And when I was looking in all the wrong spots, it was one of those things. I was given a card in life. I was thrown in a community. I was born there, and I was like, okay, go figure it out. And I go home, and there's an immigrant structure at home, and just being lost. And with the other things I talked about, like Tourette's and speech impediment and depression, it's when one hits this rock bottom. It's just this drive to be like, okay, I've figured out myself. I know what I want. I don't need to seek acceptance, validation, confirmation from the world, from people, places, and things. I've learned to do it with myself. And when I'm doing that, every minute I live is gravy. It's like whatever, right? I'm chilling. I'm not forgetting the past because it's what made me today, but it's also the key to my future. And I'm going to live today. I'm going to embrace the memories I make right now and today, and then I'll move on to tomorrow.
Dude, you need to be a comedian / motivational speaker, like for real. You need both, because I could see it happen. I could see your TED Talks right now, like for real. It would be awesome. What's your 10-year plan for comedy? Where do you think you're going with it?
A good question. I thought about this. I don't like to plan too far in advance, but I do have some milestones I want to hit and some measurable goals right now, or like, I might have an open mic this week, something like that. And I think there's two silos in speaking careers. There's this whole like corporate world, like motivational speakers and keynotes, which does pay. And I don't have to be a well-known comedian to get paid, or a well-known key speaker. It's just signing up with something like the Speaker Bureau. And here's what I'm about. I'm a mental health advocate, survivor, all this bullshit. And I can go and do keynotes to like Indo-Canadian physicians or mental health organizations or Tourette syndrome organizations, or I don't know, social workers, like whatever. There's corporate events like in the hundreds in cities like every day that require keynote speakers. That does pay. And it's a matter, and I'm working towards that silo as well, because that will allow me to quit my job or leave my job in public health in the Arctic. And I don't want to do that for the rest of my life. Again, it's after giving someone a message. If there's a value in what we have to say, usually these keynotes are structured. Here's my story. Here's what I learned. Here's what I'm going to give you to take away that you might be able to use and enhance in your life. And then the other is this comedian thing. If I can kind of leave my work and do a keynote once a month, which allows me to kind of, get paid, I will grind it out in clubs. I will go have some fun. I go into Ducky with zero expectation. and I just go and have fun. And to me, being on stage in front of an audience and allowing me the venue and the audience allowing me to speak is more than enough. Everything else is cosmetic.
It sounds to me like you that's actually an awesome career path for you. If you can mix the comedy with the motivational speaking, but like you have a story, like you said, and you're very charismatic and your comedy's funny. So why not use that and get out there and do it? The other thing I would suggest, it seems like you're pretty good at this. Have you ever considered starting a podcast?
I have.
And even write a book or something like that. It seems like you have such a good story to tell, and it's going to have the happiest of endings. So it's freaking awesome. The one thing I will ask, if somebody is struggling, what do you suggest they do? Especially with the depression. Like I know that you talked about the depression. How do you get back out of that? That's the one thing I want to know. What was your journey to get out of the depression? You just hit rock bottom and you decided, I'm going to make this better, goddammit. Is that what it was?
Pretty much. One of the key, I did go to rehab. I went to treatment, and I will share this for the reason that it was not the facility. It was not the nice rooms. It definitely wasn't the $300 a day. It was, but it was the best $300 a day for 30 days I ever spent. And,
oh, wow.
It was the people I surrounded myself with. 80 dudes, plus or minus 5 years of age, all different walks of life. Okay. Culture, race, any ethnic background, whatever you want to call it. But we all had common stories. When we started sharing at a table, we started talking about our stories, and we're like, oh my God, I'm not too far off than what he did. He's not too far off from me. And when we did that, we found a common ground, and we're like, okay, it's kind of like we need to see that. So my advice with anyone with Tourette's that's worked for me, and again, this is what works for me might not work for others, is that find focus groups or groups where you can get together and with other individuals that have Tourette syndrome, let's say, and you can tackle, okay, what are some triggers? How can we restrain them? And what environments kind of control them? Maybe not in larger groups, because then, it'll just look like a bunch of drunk kids on the street or people doing the wave or something. But but it is an idea where talking about it, not bottling it up. When we bottle things up, it comes out in toxic ways, whether it's isolating, drinking, gambling, drug use, whatever you want to call it. But when I share, none of that happens to me. The risk is a lot lower. That's one thing. The other thing, to someone extremely young that's struggling with it, is keep your family members close, the ones that you have. Love and compassion is everything to get through everything. When something like that is lacking at home and at school, we don't have any of it, that can be an issue. So hold on to the love and compassion that you do have. It might not be to the fullest, but it's just one person. That definitely does help through an early childhood. And I think the third thing for me is that no drug will help it. It might suppress it for a short interim period of time. But the key is kind of the formula I gave is like being aware of it, recognizing it, and time. And when we do that, that's when we can recognize our triggers and we learn to control it with age. And that's the key thing is age and time.
I'm telling you, dude, you need to start that podcast. You're a talker, man. You're a speaker and you have passion, and I can feel that. Even more so, like the passion in which you talk about this subject, but like just in general, you have this charisma and just this drive, it feels like, man. You're going to be so successful. I can't wait to see what you do. Yes, dude, thank you so much for talking to me. I really do appreciate it.
It's just an honor, though. Like, thank you for like allowing me to share my thoughts today with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate you talking to me. Azreer Gill, thank you so much for being here. Good luck to you in everything that you do. And I hopefully will see you on September 15th. Is that right?
Yeah, I'll give you a heads up, and maybe we can grab a bite to eat sometime too. Oh, yeah. And I'll keep you guys posted for sure.
That'd be awesome, dude. I can't wait to see you on that date.
And there it is. Thank you again so much for checking out the podcast today. If you enjoyed it, head over to your favorite podcast app, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, and iTunes, and give We Are Podcast Network a like. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, you're going to love the other podcasts here on the We Are Podcast Network. We have We Are Air, where we talk movies, entertainment, whatever the fuck we want to talk about. That's me, that's Jake, and that's Javi. We're breaking down that pop culture, and we're having so much fun. We Are Bagu, a video game podcast where we talk Atari to Steam and everything between. That's me and Dr. Ethan Eastwood breaking down all that video game lore and having such a good time. Heroes, Gyros, a Dungeons and Distractions side quest. Me and the boys were playing some D&D. You can start that one from Season 1, Episode 1. It's a blast the whole way through. And finally, our new live video podcast, Camp Slash Horrorcast, where we're going to have a roundtable discussion about our favorite horror movies. That'll be available on Twitch and YouTube, streaming every Monday at 8 p.m. Check the links in the description to find out what movies we'll be watching. Also, check the links in the description for our social media. You can find us at Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at /We Are Podcast Network. With that said, thank you so much for checking out the podcast today. Please remember to support local comedy in any way that you can. We'll see you next time.